Hello, Dr. Dick here. Today we're going to talk about boomers and the great Social Security scam. Now I know Social Security is a very touchy topic. It's highly emotional for many people. Today I'm going to show you that it's really not about the politics. It's about the math. So let's move in. What is Social Security really? Originally, this law was enacted way back in 1933 under President Roosevelt. It was called the Old Age Survivors and Disability Insurance Program, or OASDI. President Roosevelt was concerned that many seniors were retiring in poverty, and he felt that the government needed to do something to bring them out of poverty. And so that was the real motivation behind this, because he didn't want to sell it as a, quote, welfare kind of program. He made everybody eligible for it, including wealthy retirees. Over the years, Congress has also added additional people. If a man or person dies, their spouse, their widow or widower can collect from it. Their children can collect from it till they are 18, etc. So the program has been changed and expanded many times since 1933. In 1933, there were roughly 17 workers for each retiree, and the life expectancy for men in the USA was roughly 65. They were eligible at 62, so the expectation is the government would only be paying these benefits on average for 3 years. In addition, taxes were collected the first, I believe it was 4 years before any benefits were paid out. Now in the year 2011, we're down to 3 or 4 workers for each retiree, or we will be soon. The life expectancy for men is almost 80, and it's even older for women. So while the plan is basically the same, we're now going to be paying benefits for roughly 13 or 14 years, because the retirement age has been raised to 66 for my age group, 67 for others. So we're going to be paying roughly 13 or 14 years instead of 3. That certainly has an impact on the system. Now, how is Social Security funded? Basically, it's funded through payroll taxes, commonly known as FICA taxes. The maximum taxable wage and the rate have been modified many times by Congress. Right now, I believe the max taxable amount is roughly $100,000 or so. The rate is roughly 7.5% or so, but those have been played with a number of times. If you are a self-employed or S-type business, you actually get to pay double. You get to pay what's called a self-employment tax. Large businesses also match the contributions of employees. The taxes are collected in what's called a Federal Old Age and Survivors Insurance Trust Fund, or the Federal Social Security Trust Fund is commonly known. However, there really is no trust fund in the sense that this is money that's set aside and locked away from the reach of Congress. In fact, one of our major debtors for our national debt is this trust fund, because Congress borrowed money from this trust fund to spend in other ways. So the fact is there's not really any money in the trust fund at this time. In fiscal year 10, the cost of Social Security payouts was $695 billion, or 19.5% of the total federal outlays. Social Security was the _1 expenditure in the federal budget. It's actually higher than the Department of Defense, which came in second at $664 billion. And this is while we were fighting multiple wars. And Medicare came in third at $453 billion. We'll talk more about Medicare in a future video. Now, I did a simple math exercise to just show you how this doesn't work when you have 17 workers for every retiree, and then it slowly goes down to 3 or 4. I started in 1933 with 17 people putting in $100 a year, one person taking out $100 a year, and then each 6 years after that, I decreased the number of workers by 1 and increased the number of retirees by 1. Now, I admit this is a gross oversimplification, okay? But as you can see, the net amount of money in the current year actually increases to a maximum in the 80s, and then it begins to decline. That's because the number of workers is getting smaller and the number of retirees is getting greater. The cumulative amount of money in the fund actually over the years starts off at $1,700, of course, and then gradually it goes through zero and becomes negative. Now, of course, this is a gross oversimplification. I also show you the blue line in more detail. But, you know, if you're Bernie Madoff and you're trying to sell this plan to somebody, it would be obvious. It's less obvious when it's the government trying to tell you that this is an actuarially sound annuity for you. Well, let's just not depend on my simple little Excel spreadsheet calculation. Let's go and see what the Congressional Budget Office says. They're nonpartisan. They mostly get these things right, although it certainly depends on what kind of assumptions they make and so on. Here's a chart straight off of the Social Security website that shows tax revenues and outlays in the projected future of those things. You can see the revenues are this line right here, the outlays are the bigger line, and then the blue cloud reflects all the uncertainties about things like death rate, unemployment, etc., etc. And so it's pretty clear that, and I'm not sure what the scale over here is. It's percentage of gross domestic product. So it's pretty clear that something like 6 or as many as 9% of our GDP would be paid out to this program, this one program, in the out years, 50, 60, 80 years from now. If there's any doubt in your mind that the Social Security Trust Fund is going broke, this shows the trust fund ratio, that is the ratio of the balance amount in the trust fund at the beginning of the year to outlays in that year. And pretty clear that, as most people have predicted, by 2030 or so, or 2040, this thing will in fact go broke, meaning it will go negative. That's not even including the fact that Congress has borrowed against the money. So clearly this is a major problem. Now, what's the government going to do about it? Well, for roughly 30 years, Congress has merely kicked this can down the road. They've made changes here and there, but they don't want to deal with it. You know, it's too hard to solve. President Bush, too, George W. Bush, wanted to privatize Social Security. His idea was we would take younger people and allow them to put their FICA tax money into a type of government-run 401k, that it would be invested in mutual funds, much like other 401ks are. He happened to make the mistake of doing this in 2001 when the stock market crashed, and so he got roundly annihilated for even suggesting this. And President Bush, whether you love him or hate him, found out just how radioactive this issue is. And this is why nobody wants to touch it. Now, there are special interest groups like the AARP actually running ads on TV. I've seen this ad where they show this little baby, an infant, and claim they're going to be sure that Social Security is still there for this infant. Well, that's baloney, okay? The AARP, in my opinion, does not represent seniors. They are an insurance company that's making money off seniors by selling them medical and other types of insurance. Just my opinion. But in any case, they're avoiding any kind of real solutions. Unfortunately, neither national party really wants to touch this, especially after the Bush experience, because they know that it's too politically hot. But we really don't have a choice. What could we do if we were acting like adults? Well, there are several things I think we could do. I'm not necessarily recommending these things. I'm not running for public office. One thing we could do is just admit that Social Security is, in fact, a welfare program for low-income seniors. We could do means testing on all recipients. If you're above adjusted gross income, or AGI, is above some number, you're not eligible to receive Social Security. Okay? Now we have to decide where to draw the line. $250,000 a year is President Obama's favorite number that divides the rich from the middle class. You might want to make it lower. But wherever you draw the line, you got to draw it somewhere. The maximum current payouts for Social Security are roughly $2,000 a month or so. So we're only talking about $24,000 a year. You could argue if you're making above, again, draw the line where you want, you're making above this number, you don't need that $24K. So that's one thing we could do. We could also make various structural changes, as have been suggested, to reflect the times that we live in. We can raise the retirement age to reflect the longer life expectancy. We could increase the FICA tax rate and or the maximum income that you pay FICA taxes on. These, fundamentally are tax increases. You could put a cap on the COLA, or cost of living increases, that Social Security gets, because that's another thing that drives the cost up. And last but not least, you could actually phase out the entire program and say, look, it's fiscally unsustainable and we can't keep doing this. I don't know if we will do any of these things. Personally, I like this one here. Admit it's a welfare program. I think we could also make some structural changes. But I'm not running for political office. I have no idea what's really going to happen. So how are the various changes that might happen affect boomers? Even if the whole thing goes broke, the government goes broke, because Congress does nothing about this, it's going to affect you if you're a boomer or if you're the child of a boomer. First of all, there are just going to be fewer dollars to count on in your retirement years, no matter how you cut it. Whether you get told you're not going to receive Social Security at all because you make too much money, whether the benefits are cut back, whatever happens, fewer dollars. During your working years, you're probably going to pay higher taxes for Social Security, among other things. So you have to take that into account. I predict there will be major political anger over these broken promises. President Obama has called Social Security and Medicare major social contracts between the government and the people. Well, I don't disagree with that statement. However, that just means that the people are going to be even more angry when they realize that the government's been lying to them for 40, 50, 60 years. Many, like me, have paid into this their entire lives. Many years I paid the maximum. And, you know, when you get told you get nothing out of what you've paid into your entire life, you're bound to be mad. I'm mad. At the same time, I understand that we have to move on, whatever happens. Your children and grandchildren are going to bear much of the financial burden, just like they're going to bear the burden of the national debt. Well, what should boomers do? Well, we do have some political power. I think we need to insist that Congress address this issue now, however they address it. They should have the political courage to stand up, act like grown-ups, and address this issue. We can't keep putting it off. Secondly, I believe that boomers need to find private alternatives to Social Security if it's going to be reduced or disappears entirely. You need to reassess your investment strategies and see that you're investing for more cash flow that will pay you money instead of just for appreciation. You might want to consider new business ventures that will bring cash flow into your life in your later years to make up for what you're not going to get from the government. And lastly, you can also adjust your retirement expectations. You can work longer if you're able to do that. You can plan to live on less and simplify your life. All of those are options that you have. My prediction is that Social Security is going to be the first rock to go. In other words, I believe it is the first broken promise of government that will be exposed for what it is, rightly or wrongly. I'm not saying that's a good thing. I'm saying you should prepare for that to happen. Somebody said getting old is not for sissies, and I certainly agree with that statement. I don't know who said it. But this is one of the things that boomers are going to have to deal with. Now, please stay tuned for more presentations of this type on boomers and the challenges that they faced. If you're watching this on YouTube, go to my blog and subscribe so that you don't miss a single one. That would be drdickpritchard.com. You will hear more about the national debt, about Medicare, a great and important issue for seniors. And I'll see you in the next round. Thank you, Dr. Dick.